Genesis 46 today. We'll probably get into 47 as well. Last week the brothers of Joseph discover that he is the Pharaoh, or right under Pharaoh. They're joyfully reunited. Joseph forgives his brothers for selling him into slavery. And we left with Joseph saying, hey, take the train, take all the carts back to Dad and bring your stuff. You're moving the family to Egypt, right? We're 2 years into the 7-year famine, and this is the safe place and the best place to be. So today we get the old man Jacob at 130 years old coming to see his son that he hasn't seen in, I think we're saying 13 years or so. Pretty special moment here. So I will just dive straight into the verses, and I will skip a little bit. There's a lot of names here, and I don't want to embarrass myself. But
you could have Bob read.
Or we could have Bob read. That's okay. That's okay. It's one of those things where our goal isn't to dissect every verse. We are more of an isagogical class where we will skim a little bit here. So, chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. They also took with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. And Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt. He took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his granddaughters and granddaughters, all of his offspring. These are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants who went to Egypt. Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, and the sons of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, and following. The sons of Levi, and following. The sons of Judah, and following. The sons of Issachar, and following. And the sons of Zebulun. These were the sons of Leah, born to Jacob in Padan Aram, besides his daughter Dinah. These sons and daughters of his were 33 in all, the sons of Gad, the sons of Asher. These were the children born to Jacob by Zilpah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Leah, 16 in all, the sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, the sons of Benjamin. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 in all. The son of Dan, you only got one. The sons of Naphtali. These were the sons born to Jacob by Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel, 7 in all. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, these who were in direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons, with the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt. The members of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all. All right, now I'll tap Bob to finish it out there from 28 to the end.
28 to the end?
Yes.
Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, what is your occupation? You should answer, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians.
Thank you much. All right. Dirty, stinky shepherds, apparently, huh? We'll talk about it. Verse 27. That's the look section there. There were 70 in all that went down to Egypt. What we have in these verses is clearly not a passenger list of all those who traveled to Egypt with Jacob's caravan. Some of the people named here were already in Egypt. Some had not been born. Some were already dead. The statement in verse 8, these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt, must therefore be understood as describing a genealogical table. Two different totals are given, the figure of 66, including only Jacob's descendants. His sons' wives are not counted. The figure of 70 apparently includes the patriarch himself, plus Joseph and his two sons, who are already in Egypt in Acts 7:14. Stephen lists the total as 75. He may have used a round number, or he may have included Joseph's 5 grandsons born in Egypt. Some have taken the number 70 to be symbolic. 7 is often the symbolic number for the covenant between the Lord and Jacob's family, and 10 symbolizes completeness. Then 7 times 10 must symbolize the fact that that's the family of Jacob, which stood in covenant relationship with God, now is complete. Any questions about that? Clear as mud, right? There's ways of explaining different numbers in the Bible, and that's probably not a number we get hung up on too much, but it's understandable. People didn't always agree at different times how to count the family or list the genealogy. So I'm good with that. Let's go to the questions. All right, so why might Jacob have been reluctant to go down to Egypt? And I think the question is kind of implying, why did God also appear to Jacob in verses 2 and 3? So why is Jacob getting another vision? He seems reluctant. Margaret?
Because he was in the promised land, and to leave the promised land, he didn't want to negate the whole promise, but it was God's encouragement to him that this was the right thing to do at this time. And he promised that he would take him back again, or his people back again.
So this is the promised land, doesn't want to leave. Other thoughts?
Yeah, he may have been worried about losing Jacob's brother. I don't know.
There's definitely, I think there's a part of that in there too, that there's a safety, there's a security. He's kind of established himself in this land, and now he's got to start over.
Yeah.
That's not going to be fun. Who likes starting over from scratch? But yeah, Jacob came through this area. He had his dream, right, where he saw the staircase going up to heaven. God said, I'm going to bring you back here. After being in Haran and finding a wife, he's finally back here. So he's understandably quite attached to staying. But as you mentioned, and you kind of touched upon the second part of the question there, what did the Lord promise him? You're going to come back. So this is going to be a temporary thing. And by temporary, we're talking like 400 years. Don't you love it when the Lord does that? Says it's not going to be a long time until I return or until you return. So
But he was buried.
he counts in hundreds of years, though. We're thinking like 16 months. Yeah, you had a thought,
He was buried there.
but he would. Yeah, he is going to be buried there.
But he dies in.
Right. So, and yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna. Should we say the burial is the fulfillment, or the promise is really to his family?
Oh, the burial could be.
Well, I guess-
Resting place.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing also is that he's promised to be with Joseph again. It's Joseph himself who will close his eyes at his death.
Yeah. So that's all the more reason to go see his son before he dies, right? And that's all he needs to do. But as we'll see in the next chapter, he has some cool conversations with Pharaoh. So we'll get to that too. In fact, he kind of talks to Pharaoh like Pharaoh's a kid, in my opinion. I think. Not down to him, but just as his elder. What other concerns might he have down in Egypt? The editor makes a comment here, and we see it later in the verses. Might be concerned that they might be absorbed into Egypt, right? You think, well, if we move down there, we're going to become like them, right? And that's not going to be good, of course, because they are a pagan people, right? An idolatrous people. So, yeah. All right, so the nation is going to grow, but it's not going to grow in the promised land. Question 2, how would the Israelites' occupation help isolate them from the corrupting influence of the Egyptians? Susan?
Well, the plan was, because they were shepherds, and the shepherds were hated by the Egyptians, obviously they're separated. So, I think Joseph already had this plan, because he kind of schemes and tells his brothers to say that this is their occupation and their father's occupation and grandfather's occupation. So anyway, they're sent over to Goshen, which is a better area. And that was part of God's plan.
Yeah.
To separate them, to keep them away.
Margaret?
God doesn't send them down to the southwest part of Egypt either. He leaves them up there where it's going to be quicker escape when the time comes.
This is true too. So when you're thinking of Egypt, you're thinking of the Nile River. I mean, this is the northeastern kind of quadrant of Egypt, just off the Nile River. And I'm not a geography major, but it's going to flood there, or not flood there for 5 years. But yeah, you get some water for your animals, and you can imagine too. This is probably your flocks can kind of grow maybe more during a famine than your crops would. Right? And we already kind of established that they're not even planting their crops because they know the famine is there. So I couldn't nail down too much why shepherds were detestable people. I mean, I could have my guesses. You could have your guesses. I don't know if anybody's study Bible mentions anything about that. I wonder if it's just kind of like us. I mean, there's things that we want and need done, but we don't want it done in our backyard. Like maybe we want coal-powered fire plants or nuclear plants, but we don't want it in our backyard. Margaret, yeah.
I have the study Bible note here, the shepherds and the abomination.
there's a reference to Proverbs 6:16. Various explanations are offered. For example, the bulls frequently symbolized pharaohs. A bull and a cow represented the Egyptian god Apis and the goddess Hathor, respectively, which might make those who cared for sheep or lesser creatures religiously and culturally offensive. Also, the Egyptians had a caste system in which shepherds were lowly ranked.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with it, right? These are, I mean, these people are coming and they're really doing kind of a slave job, right? So I guess, you know, you think of American history, you think of cotton pickers, right? I mean, they were looked down upon, and they, you know, a white person would never have their kids working on a cotton field. I bet it's something like that. Like, it's a job that has to get done, but boy, that's not our culture. That's not what my kids would do, type of thing. So, yeah.
What other kind of animals did they have?
What kind of other animals did they
Yeah,
have?
because isn't it always said that sheep like to graze and be open, and they don't get along real well with a lot of the other domestic animals? But I don't know what kind of domestic animals they might have had.
So, I think I shared this story back in Washington where the sheep grazers got into it with the cattle grazers, and the cattle grazers, you know, killed all their sheep. So, at some point too, I mean, I think there is some of that where sheep seem to be, you know, they can mow a field maybe rather quickly and move, and in my mind, it's almost like you could have maybe not, I'll say, conniving shepherds. You probably could think of them as that, like, well, no one's over there right now. We'll go over there. We'll just be in the afternoon, then we'll leave. So I can see where a shepherd could get themselves into some trouble pretty quickly with their neighbors, especially if you were grazing bigger animals and you thought you were going to go to another field and it's cleaned off. I mean, that's kind of one of the Old West problem. So yeah, and maybe I think it's just well said. They were a slave society. They had lots of slaves, you know, and this is slave work at best. But I digress. What's really important though is that, you know, Jacob does play this up. Jacob is like, hey, here's my family, and they're shepherds. Did I tell you they're shepherds? And you can see that he's really keeping the promise of the nation in his mind here. Not telling people, not telling Pharaoh they need to be their own nation, but he's definitely making those kinds of arrangements that they're not going to be absorbed into the culture. They're not going to become Egyptian lights. And it'll be good for them to be worshiping the Lord in their own Goshen area. So, any other thoughts? Apply the touching scene of Joseph weeping for a long time when he met his father again reminds us of one of the great joys that heaven will provide. What will heaven provide us?
Great reunion.
Bob says great reunion, yeah.
And no more tears.
If anything, there's tears of joy in heaven, right? Yeah. Because tears weren't supposed to be of sadness, right? Tears, God gave, I think Adam and Eve had tears, but probably just to water their eyes. But, yeah. So that is chapter 46. Any comments or thoughts before we start to move on? The summary there, Israel took his family to Egypt. God told him he would not to be afraid there, and Joseph arranged for the family to live in Goshen. And I commented last time, there's good archaeology in Goshen where you can actually see an ancient city there that was in the Israelite style of housing and structure. Maybe that would make for a good video lesson sometime this summer when we finish Genesis or something. You can watch something about Goshen. All right, I just made a promise. I better keep that. All right, chapter 47. It doesn't have as many names, so I feel very confident that we'll have some great volunteers, readers. So what happens in Egypt? Well, Joseph brings his dad to the man. And let's split this up. First 12 verses. Margaret, we'll take it. Okay.
Jacob's family settles in Goshen. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents.
Verse 13. Adrian?
There was no food in all the land, because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan grew weak because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan as payment for the grain that they purchased. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. When all the money in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan had been spent, all the Egyptians came to Egypt and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die right in front of your eyes? Look, our money is running out." So Joseph said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock if your money is gone." They brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, and for the flocks, and for the herds, and for the donkeys. He supplied them with food for that year in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was ended, they came to him during the second year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord the fact that our money is all spent, and the herds of livestock belong to my lord. The Lord can see that we have nothing left but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die right in front of your eyes, both we and our land? Purchase us and our land in exchange for bread, and we along with our land will serve Pharaoh. Give us seed, so that we may live and not die, so that the land will not be desolate." So Joseph purchased all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, because every man among the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine had them in its grip, and the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made them all servants, from one end of the territory of Egypt all the way to the other end of it. The land that belonged to the priests was the only land that he did not purchase, because the priests had a regular allotment from Pharaoh and ate from the allotment that Pharaoh gave them. That is why they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Since I have purchased you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you to sow the land. This is what you shall do at the harvest. Give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 will be your own share, which you can use as seed to sow the field and as food for yourselves, for everyone in your household, and for your little ones." They said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." Joseph made it a regulation concerning the farmland in Egypt to this day, that Pharaoh should receive a fifth of the produce. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Israel lived in the land of Egypt, the land of Goshen, and they acquired possessions for themselves there. They were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. The time drew near that Israel must die. So he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truthfully with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I rest with my fathers, you are to carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He said, "I will do as you have said." He said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Israel bowed himself on the headpost of the bed.
Alright. So, read verse 31 again.
Okay, he said, "Swear to me," and he swore to him. Israel bowed himself on the headpost of the bed. And it says the Hebrew text reads bed, and the Greek text reads staff.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering
But
why,
it's found
wondered
right
why I
in
had a
11:21.
interpretation there. So, interesting side note. We have a Greek Old Testament that's older than the Hebrew Old Testament. Sorry. So there is a affinity to look at the Septuagint and use that translation as opposed to some of the older Hebrew texts. So for instance, when Jesus quotes the Old Testament, he quotes the Septuagint, which is the Greek, not the Hebrew. So not that it's a huge deal, but you run across this where it's like, well, is it a bed or is it a staff? And you're like, well, the oldest manuscript that's Greek says staff, but the newer Hebrew text says bedpost. So maybe something's lost in translation. Maybe there's not a great translation for it, but you run across that sometimes. So, anyway, he worshipped. We're good with that. Okay, I digress. Interesting note there. I probably prefer what the EHV did with that. Go to the Hebrew and not lean on the Septuagint. In my mind, it's kind of like leaning on the King James or something. You know, maybe not the best place to go. Go back to their original.
It references Hebrews 11:21, and then 11:21 says, "By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed Egypt, Joseph's sons, and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff." That's in Hebrew.
Yeah. But verse 28, look, God gave Jacob 17 years with Joseph in Egypt. What a blessing for the patriarch who thought his son was dead. Question 1. Jacob said that his years had been few and difficult. Discuss what had made his life difficult. I don't know. Do you feel like he's kind of whining a little bit? But what is he thinking about? Yeah.
Well, right from the beginning, he and Esau didn't see eye to eye, and he had to leave the land.
So he wasn't Dad's favorite. His brother got mad at him. He had to leave. Then, yeah, Joan.
And then he had to deal with a conniving father-in-law.
He had Laban for,
Substituted wives.
yeah, it should have been 7 years, but turned into 14, and then I think he stuck around for 21 total, I think, something like that. Yeah. Sharon?
Well, then after the drama with that, and he leaves, then he has the issue with his two sons, his daughter, Dinah and his two sons, and the whole Shechem issue. And then Joseph being sold. I mean, he lost his son Joseph, which really paralyzed him in many ways. I also put wrestling with God at different times. Both his faith and physically wrestling. I mean, that was out there all put it forward, and it kept the faith. But over against his father Isaac and Abraham, I think he had a more tumultuous years of experience.
Yeah, if I had to be Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, Jacob might have been the last guy I would have chosen. Yeah, good summary. Yeah.
And now his declining years, he had to leave what he called his home, his comfort, and he had to go into a new area.
You gonna talk to a 130-year-old guy and tell him he has to move? Not the nursing home in Egypt, right? Not exactly the greatest thing here either. So I don't know. What's his point here? I mean, it sounds kind of strange. I've lived 130 years, but they've been short and difficult. I suppose he's just making the comment here that yeah, he's been through a lot, but maybe that's a testimony to God's faithfulness. You know, I mean, Margaret?
Well, his forefathers lived longer than that.
Yeah, I think the People's Bible makes that comment quite a bit. Like, well, in comparison to Abraham, who lived, about 185, and Isaac, who didn't quite make that number, but yeah, so maybe he's feeling his age, like he could be 60 years old going on 85 sometimes because you've had a hard life. He's had a hard life. Maybe he's looking his age here, or more so. Compare what Jacob says here with what he says later in Genesis 48:15 and 16. So what does he say in chapter 48:15 and 16? Then he blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they greatly increase upon the earth." So, is there a different tone in those verses? Clearly, yeah. And how has this tone changed here in the next chapter? Certainly doesn't seem as whiny, or in a sense he's saying, God has been good to me, and he has blessed me. Hope he blesses you guys likewise. Interestingly enough, with this being Good Shepherd Sunday, this is the first and only reference in Genesis to the Lord being a shepherd. So the Lord has shepherded him, and I suppose you could he's probably thinking quite literally, like, I have been like a sheep that keeps going from here to there to here, but and all these different pastures God has provided for me. And yeah, it's probably a sermon in that, right? It's just what pastures has the Lord brought you to and taken care of you in.
Might be worth, we always, Good Shepherd, Psalm 23 and the usual New Testament shepherding, but now that you point this out, this would be worth referencing in a sermon to go back to that time. It's one of the first.
That's
Like
it.
it's overlooked.
I know. Right now I feel like I should just scrap the sermon I have on my desk and I should just write this sermon.
Good next year.
But Good Shepherd Sunday will come around again. Yes. But yeah. 3, twice Jacob blessed Pharaoh. What does that tell you about Jacob's greatness relative to Pharaoh's greatness? And I don't know, I struggle with this question a little bit because what is he doing here? I'm not gonna say he's a senile old man, right? I mean you could see it's not that he's like, oh, here's Pharaoh and good little Pharaoh, God bless you. But what is he really doing? Richard, yeah.
Well, it's almost like, I don't know, Jacob's, kind of being better than Pharaoh in that sense. Like, kind of surpassing him. I don't know really how else to answer it, but yeah, he's treating Pharaoh like he's like the second in command, that Jacob's better, better than him.
That's where the editor goes. So I'll read my answer, editor's answer. So the editor says, Jacob, an old shepherd, stood before Pharaoh. What a contrast. A humble shepherd standing next to the greatest and most powerful man in the world. Yet, this shepherd blessed the ruler of the world. The rule of thumb is that the greater people bless the lesser people. Jacob, the leader of God's Old Testament kingdom, was greater than the ruler of the kingdom of Egypt.
Right.
So, I don't know. The only reason I struggle with that interpretation, and someone much smarter than me doesn't, but I struggle with it in the sense that he is a guest, right? So I don't think Pharaoh comes away with this thought, does he? Does Pharaoh come away with the thought that this man thinks he's greater than me? I think we know the answer is that is true, right? We know omnisciently this blessing is appropriate because he is greater than Pharaoh, because he's God's chosen patriarch. But I think on another level, what is Pharaoh hearing? I think Pharaoh's hearing, I don't know, Joel?
Well, I think they're grateful to Pharaoh because Pharaoh has elevated Joseph in the kingdom, and he's taking care of them by giving them the best property for their cattle and all those things to live. And this happens to be a good Pharaoh, unlike the ones that come after him.
Yeah, and I don't know. I almost feel like this blessing is not so much like a statement of rank, but the blessing is really a statement of gratefulness. Like, you could ask the Lord to bless someone that doesn't believe what you believe, right? I mean, if our church goes to court and the court rules on our behalf, and we might say a prayer of blessing, thanking God for that judge, even if they were an atheist, right? They blessed us, and I think that is a real part of why Jacob wants to talk to Pharaoh. I mean, God is using him, Pharaoh, to keep this promise of a savior and nation alive, and so Yeah, when you say God bless you, I think a lot of times we are just saying God is using you for something good, even if you maybe don't even realize it. As a parent or as a judge or as a neighbor, God bless you.
Although,
Another thing, yeah, Richard.
sorry about that. Yeah, although that when you read through the verse, that I don't really agree with how, they were put in slavery with the Egyptians and they sold them, about bondage.
Oh, Joseph was sold, or
Well, the people were, that they were starving and in famine, that they had to give up their livestock.
yeah, we need to talk about that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Let's hold that thought for a second.
okay.
Yeah,
I
Myron.
want to make one comment about Pharaoh. I think that when Pharaoh was listening to Jacob talk to him and so forth, he was thinking, and this is what I would think, well, they're not a threat, and they've helped us before, maybe they'll be able to help us again, and they're going to be out of the way, and there's really there's no conflict here. I think he thought that was a good thing.
Yeah, there's a little detail in there that didn't jump out at me yesterday, but does it to me now, is the fact that Pharaoh's like, here, have some of my cattle too.
Yeah, take care of them and increase them.
Yeah, so be a partaker here in a little bit of my kingdom. Yeah.
Going back to the blessing, remember that God came to Jacob and told him that this is what he wanted him to do. He wanted him to go. So the blessing that Jacob gave Pharaoh was God's blessing because this was God's plan. And even though Pharaoh doesn't understand this, Jacob does. And he's blessing Pharaoh because God had made this promise to him through gold that blessings will come from this. And it'll come through Pharaoh and through his kingdom.
Yeah, there's a
I
lot
think
of
that's
a lot of things at play, and you see his great respect for Pharaoh, and he realizes that God is going to use this kingdom to their glory. It's almost the opposite of what we'll see later in the New Testament with the Babylonian, or later in the Old Testament with the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Right? They become God's hammer against the nation, and this is completely different. Pharaoh becomes the staff that blesses the nation. You could think here too that he's really setting the standard for the whole nation as well. If Jacob would go down to Egypt and be like, well, I respect my son, but I don't respect the Pharaoh, right? And you can see divisions like that just completely get squashed here. Jacob is like, we're not going to be that type of people down here. Which makes the slavery later, more difficult. It's not like Jacob and his descendants screwed up and now they become slaves. No, they were very respectful and honest. So to Richard's point here, he's, maybe that's question 4 here. This whole sell your, give us money, sell us your property, become our slaves, and we'll keep feeding you. Right? People are running out of money. Question 4 there says, how was Egypt's economy permanently altered at this time? It's kind of like their pandemic, isn't it? Like there's the world before and there's the world after. There's the world before the famine, there's the world after the famine. The economy has changed. What is the big change?
The famine forced the Egyptian nation to almost give everything over to Pharaoh in order to survive.
All right, so it appears that Egypt is more of a clan society, right? Different warlords as such, and family groups. But now this famine is consolidating power to this Pharaoh. Now, we could think of a few ways about this. One is this is probably a blessing to them that it's done without war. I mean, how many countries consolidate and have one leader without war? Probably very few circumstances otherwise. I guess I would just say it's just predictable that someone would probably ruthlessly want to take over all of Egypt. And this isn't ruthless at all as far as war goes. But is it ethical? Richard kind of tipped his hat in the ring here and said he doesn't think it's too ethical how he was like maybe dragging them along into this slavery and selling their land. Does anyone want to take the other side of the coin and say maybe this was ethical? Richard, or did I construe your comment?
No, I was just thinking about this just now. This must have been God's plan for Jacob to want to do this for a reason, because if they hadn't gone into slavery and handed over to the Egyptians, then there would be no reason for Moses to deliver them. So I know I'm kind of thinking a little ahead here, but I think maybe this was...
Okay, so I just want to, let me back you up a second. So this isn't necessarily the Israelites becoming slaves yet.
You're right.
This is more of a comment about the rest of the Egyptian land that isn't under Pharaoh.
Right.
Right.
So the Israelites, they just got this land, and they're provided for because of Jacob. But everybody else doesn't have, Jacob and Pharaoh's blessing, so to speak. Your other peoples are becoming, brought up, right? They're being consolidated.
Well, Lord,
And,
the Lord works in mysterious ways, so we don't exactly know why He lets this stuff happen sometimes. But
Sure.
we just have to just basically trust Him and just have faith.
It may be just, Susan?
Didn't Pharaoh's land through this, or his kingdom through this, become much greater?
It did, right. So,
So, yes, that leads to everything that comes afterwards with the Israelites becoming, the children of Israel becoming slaves later. I mean, if you think he's growing, he's gotta have somebody to control this, right?
yeah.
And they have to survive. What is he gonna do with all of this desolation?
And I think the People's Bible mentions it, and I would agree with it too, that you have 5 years of famine, and you can't squeeze blood from a turnip, right? You can't take all their money and all their land in year 2 if you know that they're going to be back in year 4 or 5, right? So Jacob kind of, I don't know, gives them a bill they can kind of pay. And at a certain point, the last thing to sell is their land and themselves, and they become sharecroppers, if you will use again American terms, right? They're going to farm in the future and give a fifth to Pharaoh, and you think a fifth is a lot, maybe you're in a good tax bracket. That's probably pretty decent, especially if you're got a big farm. So, Bob, did you have a comment?
I was gonna say, we're talking about the economy, shift in economy. This established Pharaoh is getting 1/5 of everything forever. I mean, I think that was the average American today does not pay 20%.
Right, and even if you don't think you pay 20%, you don't pay your gas tax and all sorts of fees and everything, right? So the country really becomes the Egypt that we know love, I guess, expect, and such. But comments otherwise? Again, my editor makes a note here that, Joseph has to be pretty wise in managing the stock of grain at this time too. But and maybe just back to a point in general about Pharaoh. I think he really wants to say thank you to Joseph, right? And to Joseph's God. And how can he give Joseph any more blessing? And I think this is the one way he figures out how to do that, right? This is, Joseph can only get so many flowers and boxes of chocolates and days off. But this is the way he can really thank Joseph for saving his country and now being a blessing to him even further. Makes you wonder where Potiphar is at this time. I don't know. Potiphar's got to be just scratching his head. Anyway, last apply question. What request did Jacob make of Joseph? And how do we imitate what Jacob did here? Read Hebrews 11:21. So maybe someone can look up Hebrews 11 and another person can answer the question. What request did Jacob make of Joseph? It's in verse 30.
He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt.
All right.
To be buried back to the burying place of Abraham, Isaac.
Bury me with Abraham and others, right? Bury me in the promised land. So at some point he's realizing in his life that the Exodus isn't happening too soon. And I suppose, of all the people that knew God was going to have to show up and, have a vision to somebody. I mean, Jacob was probably that guy, right? Jacob had a vision. I have to leave now. God says so. And he probably for sure knew that God was going to tap someone named Moses eventually to leave. So, how do we imitate what Jacob did here? How can you and I don't know, where do you want to be buried? Probably not the exact way we can imitate this, but we look forward to being buried and our soul going to heaven, right? Not looking at, I suppose, our grandeur being a stone out there on Grand Avenue, but our heart being that we'll be with the Lord and our ancestors. So, what does Hebrews 11:21 say? Church God, please.
It says, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Yeah.
All right, so there's that passage again, right? The end of the chapter. Yeah. So Jacob appeared before Pharaoh and blessed him. Joseph continued to serve the people of the land by providing them with food. Jacob made Joseph swear to take his bones to the promised land. That is chapter 47. We're getting there. We're getting there towards the end. Next week we will pick up with Joseph getting a blessing here, and Jacob blessing the children before he dies again. Kind of if I'm correct, it looks more like a flashback, right? We're told that he's going to bless his children. And here it comes. So, last comments or thoughts? Kind of not a kind of a nice time. No one sinned, and no one did anything dumb. No one argued.
Just one last.
Yeah.
Yeah, why would you snap instead of that? Because I don't understand why.
You know, the Hebrew there's probably something like a piece of wood, and you know there's a number of many Hebrew words that only appear once in like all of Scripture in the world, and they're in the Bible. So translators look at a word they only have one use of it, and they have to kind of come to a conclusion. And my guess is, if this word looks like the word for wood, the translator is debating, well, if he's an old man, he's probably on his bed, his deathbed, but if he's an old man but he's still getting around, he's probably carrying around a staff. So the translator probably just is saying something wooden, but of course that you wouldn't buy a Bible that just translated that way.
It could be either way.
Probably, right? Yeah. So they'll choose. So a lot of times, they'll just choose. They'll either go Hebrew or take the oldest text, and they'll just pick, and then they're consistent. The Bible. So the EHV is pretty consistent on. We're gonna lean towards these types of translations of. Margaret, question?
The indication in the notes here is that he was old, he was somewhat feeble, he could not get down off the bed and bow his head to the floor, which would have been the attitude of worship. And so he sat there and bowed his head over his arms on the staff because he couldn't get out of bed. I can relate to that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too. Like you probably I'm trying to think of the Abraham blessing. That you put your hand underneath your father's thigh, which he did here. But yeah, if you bless someone, you're probably touching them. You're not touching something else. So that really doesn't. I mean, if he's capable of bending over on his staff, he's probably capable of bending over on a person. But again, I'm just speculating there.
Especially if the persons are bowing before him or on their knees.
I know a lot of people with staffs that will put their staff down and hold onto your hand or something. So cool. We'll close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for blessing God, your children in Egypt, seeing how Joseph kept the nation safe, both the Egyptians and the Israelites, and how the Israelites were certainly blessed to grow there and be separated enough that they didn't lose their faith in trust in your promises. Help us continue to see you as our good shepherd today and always. Amen.